Hello and welcome to episode 14 of Diabetics for Diabetics Radio. My name is Bowie Madison. I am your host. I have had type 1 diabetes for over 21 years, and I am digging into the research, coming up with the best natural ways for healing, for curing, and looking more at disease pathology and how we got here. So today's episode is dedicated to understanding ferritin and anemia, and why an iron deficient anemia diagnosis may not mean what you think it does if you are a diabetic. Now, to preface this is branching off of episode 12 and 13, where we handled sources of inflammation and the role of iron overload in the development of diabetes. Now, the feedback I've gotten, I share through my social media channel on TikTok, and a lot of the feedback that I got was in relation to low iron. I had a lot of people, a lot of diabetics coming to me saying that iron overload idea doesn't check out because I'm anemic. And so that got me down, got me looking into the research, into how that could be, and some of the information that was available to delineate the degrees of separation in, why these people were thinking that they were anemic, why their blood tests were coming back anemic, when what I'm saying is that the whole reason they are having the health issues that they're having is because they're overloaded with iron. So that's what we're going to talk about today. A little bit more about me. Like I said, I have had type 1 diabetes for just over 21 years. I am healing naturally. Again, my A1C continues to go down. My last check was at 5.6. I am addressing inflammation at its source via correcting my iron recycling system and offloading excess iron, as well as rebuilding my natural mineral balances, all through supplementation and diet. So this all kind of started through my TikTok channel. You'll see my tag there at Bowie_Madison. And it has just blossomed into this beautiful, beautiful human petri dish that I am, as well as this kind of library of resources for other diabetics to heal as well. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, when people think of the term anemia, they are thinking of iron deficient anemia, right? Body doesn't have enough iron, and that is kind of the classic telltale sign is low iron if you're anemic. So it's the most common nutrient deficiency worldwide, affecting just over 10 million people in the United States, much more worldwide. Essentially what it is the hemoglobin protein of your red blood cell uses iron as a way to carry oxygen. So we've learned that iron is extremely reactant. It wants to bond. It wants to react. It has an extremely high affinity for oxygen. So hemoglobin leverages that by binding iron, which binds oxygen. And when the red blood cell moves through your body, it carries that oxygen in tow. Now, if you have a low serum ferritin level or low iron in your blood, that impairs your red blood cells' ability to carry oxygen. Now, if your red blood cells aren't delivering oxygen to tissues, what happens? You get tired, you get weak, you get lightheaded. These are all signs of poor energy efficiency. So without oxygen, your cells do not go. And if your red blood cells are moving around and not delivering oxygen efficiently, your cells start to feel it. Okay. And just a quick side note here, it disproportionately affects people of African descent as well as women and children. So people of African descent have a affinity or a what's the term for it? a predisposition to sickle cell anemia, which affects the shape of the red blood cell, which affects its ability to bind oxygen. And then with women and children because of their size, and women because of menstruation. And this is not me just kind of like going off the top of my head. Those are actually the reasons given in the current research. But as we'll come to find, the understanding of serum ferritin levels, the iron processing ability of the body isn't perfectly understood even to this day. Now, it's important to note that there are other types of anemia. Now, when I mentioned iron overload having a connection to diabetes, people said, that's impossible, I'm anemic. But what they didn't know was that there are different types of anemia, and there are those that having diabetes would predispose you to. So first and foremost, this is the most significant: anemia of inflammation. So it affects people who have conditions that cause inflammation, such as infections, autoimmune diseases, cancer, and chronic kidney disease. But truly, anything born of inflammation, which is most chronic conditions today, are liable to lead to anemia of inflammation, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then there's pernicious anemia, which is caused by a lack of vitamin B12. Also pertinent to diabetics because it has just come to the forefront of most diabetics' minds that metformin, the common GLP-1 agonist that is probably the most prescribed medication for type 2 diabetes, with long-time use can lead to a B12 deficiency because of its interaction with the liver, which is the main source of B12 in the body. So again, a diabetic has a predisposition to anemia of inflammation as well as pernicious anemia, both possible. There's aplastic anemia, which has to do with the bone marrow not making enough red blood cells, and then hemolytic, a condition in which the red blood cells are destroyed earlier than normal. So this is just where red blood cells don't have the shelf life that they did, or that they would if they were perfectly healthy. So lots to consider with an anemia diagnosis. Now, the theory goes, for our classic understanding of anemia, that our body doesn't have enough iron to bind hemoglobin in the blood, right? Serum ferritin, which is believed to be a direct indicator of your body's iron stores, is low. And if that's low, that means you need more in order to deliver adequate oxygen, right? And so the general consensus is, well, if you don't have enough in circulation, and that means that there isn't enough in your body, that means we need to put more into your body. So supplementing iron would put more iron in circulation, making it more likely for the hemoglobin to bind and deliver oxygen appropriately. Now, very important to talk about the logistics of anemia of inflammation. So anemia can also be a safety mechanism of the body. So in a body that is in a state of chronic inflammation, the body senses that state of high inflammation via the high rate of circulating reactive oxygen species. We talked about this in episode 12, that ROS, those superoxide ions, hydrogen peroxide, and hydroxyl free radicals are what initiate the immune responses. So when the body sees that a lot of these are floating around in the system, what happens is that your body takes the iron out of circulation. And that's because your body knows that when iron meets up with these free radicals in the body, it tends to make things worse because it knows that iron is incredibly reactive. And so this is like keeping the matches away from the dynamite, so to say, right? So in a state of inflammation, you've got all this dynamite floating around in your body. Iron is the match that is going to make that stuff blow. So your body just pulls it out of circulation to make sure that it doesn't make the inflammation worse, right? So you can I encourage you to check out episode 12 and episode 13 to get a better understanding of how iron actually does that via the Fenton reaction and the Haber-Weiss reaction. Now, so when we think of the treatment for what people are being diagnosed for as anemia, it centers around our understanding of the iron storage protein ferritin. So when anybody says, oh, I've got low iron, my blood test came back with a low ferritin level, right? So it all is based around our understanding of what it is that that protein ferritin does. So ferritin is the primary indicator in the blood to detect body iron levels. Because our current understanding is, as it is in the blood, so it is in the body. People with low serum ferritin exhibit anemic qualities. Therefore, low ferritin in the blood means that there's low iron, which means that you will get anemia. It's a little bit reductionist again. This is kind of where we are right now and why we are treating anemia the way we are. It needs to change, and we'll talk about why. So with those current treatments, right, we're low on iron, better keep adding it on, right? So iron infusions, iron drips, iron supplements, they are just overloading you with iron in hopes that your body will start to absorb it and put it into circulation so that that oxygen can get delivered. What they're finding, though, ironically, is that when they are injecting, infusing, supplementing iron, it can actually lead to an acute inflammatory response. So it can actually make inflammation worse when you go to have your iron infusion to address anemia. Now, this is just from one paper focusing on the use of vitamin E, which is a powerful antioxidant, in blood transfusions for addressing iron dysfunction in patients. So this goes on to say IV iron application to anemic patients on hemodialysis, which is a blood transfusion, leads to a oversaturation of transferrin, which is a protein that is responsible for transporting iron throughout the body. As a result, non-transferrin bound redox active, which just means unbound, it isn't bound to any protein, iron might induce lipid peroxidation, which is a form of oxidative stress. So that is a long-winded way to say that when they give a blood transfusion, the body does not have the appropriate means to handle that huge influx of iron. And because it can't handle that, there is free iron floating about. And what did we learn about free iron before? It is incredibly reactive. So if you have someone who is already in an inflammatory state with a lot of circulating free radicals, and you introduce all of that unbound iron, you get this huge inflammatory response, right? This particular article was talking about ways to mitigate that via supplementation of vitamin E. So I just think that is so telling. And I am baffled that no one has made an adjustment, because what it's saying is that, we're injecting all of this iron into the body and it is causing this unchecked inflammation. Isn't that funny? So they're seeing it acutely. Wow, when we have too much iron in the body, it leads to this incredible inflammatory cascade. How can we, on an acute basis, address the inflammation when we give these iron transfusions without expanding that vision to the body as a whole? Might it also be that our entire bodily state, the inflammatory state that we're in, might also be caused by iron? Again, we have not connected those dots yet. That is what I am here to do. Because, as we've learned, iron is a pro-oxidant. The more unbound iron you get, and again, that paper back from 2000 acknowledged it, the more unbound iron there is, the more inflammation there is, right? And our reductionist thinking in medicine right now is, well, if you're low in iron, just take more of it until it gets better. But again, nothing in the body is one-to-one. Everything is a part of something much bigger with much more supporting things upstream of each of the conditions that manifest. So you have to be mindful of the team of supporting factors. So it's not just, oh, you're low in iron, take iron. It's, you're low in iron. I wonder what of the 5 to 10 different things that influence the expression of iron and the availability of iron can I adjust to rebalance the system? Again, we do not do that. We are low in iron, take iron. Low in B12, take B12 without asking any reason why we got to this spot that we are. So what are we missing? What are we missing with this anemia? Do we actually need more iron or not? And the more I looked into it, we really don't have a perfect understanding of the iron-carrying protein ferritin. So serum ferritin is our gold standard for determining the body's iron load. But in reality, and at its core, if you were to interview ferritin and ask what it did and what it was, it would tell you that it's a storage protein. It is an intracellular, inside the cell, storage protein meant to bind iron and prevent it from becoming reactive within the cell. Which begs the question, what is a storage protein meant to be inside the cell doing in the serum? And there was an outpouring of research into, okay, what is that serum ferritin doing in the serum if it's supposed to be in the cell? And then that begs the question, okay, well, maybe there is one version that's in the cell, maybe there's one version that's in the serum. Is serum ferritin different in function than storage ferritin? Why is it in the blood, and what is it doing? And how can we use that as an accurate measure for iron? Is it an accurate measure of iron? We really are not sure. And in those cases of anemia, like pernicious anemia, like anemia of inflammation, it's clear that it's not. So here's what we know. Just a quick rundown on what we currently accept about ferritin. So storage of iron within the cell, and ferritin has an incredible ability to hold iron, 4,500 molecules or units of iron. So this is in comparison, I'll use this as a means of comparison. Transferrin, which is the protein responsible for transporting iron through the blood from one location to the next, that carries two iron molecules. Storage iron, 4,500. That's incredible. And again, keep that in your mind, because you may be thinking, well, Bowie, if transferrin can only hold 2 and ferritin can hold 4,500, might serum ferritin in the blood carry more iron and be a more efficient delivery system? Maybe. That's a good question. Hold on to that. We currently use serum levels of ferritin as a gauge for total body stores. There was a paper published in 1972 that has basically served as the foundation for our current understanding of ferritin today, saying that a majority of healthy people had a given measure of serum ferritin in their blood. Those with low serum ferritin had iron deficient anemia. Those with more serum ferritin had iron overload or hemochromatosis. So we've kind of used that metric where it's, if you're low in serum ferritin, you're low in iron. If you're high in serum ferritin, you're high in iron. And we've just kind of like gone with that. But again, we've been piecing together after that to get to the bottom of it. It turns out, for those that were curious about maybe because ferritin has such an affinity for more iron, it may be a good delivery system. It turns out that serum ferritin doesn't carry a lot of iron. It has the affinity for 4,500 units of iron in the cell. In the serum, 7. About 7 molecules of iron. Again, still more than transferrin, but that's kind of a huge discrepancy. 4,500 in the cell, only 7 outside of it. Strange. Now, one thing that they found too is that serum ferritin is glycosylated. And all that means is that it is bound to a carbohydrate. And what that does, and we'll talk more about it a little bit later, is that it changes its function. It's kind of like a Post-it note, marking it for something different, right? It's been marked with a carbohydrate to make sure that it's not, iron. It's not ferritin in the cell. It's kind of noted as being something different. And what they've done is they've found that these glycosylation patterns can be tied to an immune reaction. So it may mean that these serum ferritin molecules are marked to elicit some sort of response. They're not sure if it's immune related, processing, it could be binding for the delivery of iron. They're not sure. But again, there's something different about ferritin in serum. And that discovery gave way to this discovery of a complex relationship with the inflammation and cytokine production. Cytokine is just kind of like messenger molecules that result as a cascade down from that initial serum ferritin. So there's a lot of things that happen when serum ferritin starts to go up, one of which is a decrease in macrophage and lymphocyte production. These macrophage is like the garbage truck of the cell that kind of eats up the bad stuff. Lymphocytes are white blood cells responsible for immune health, right? So the higher ferritin gets, the lower the production of those protective mechanisms get. Okay, so that's an important dynamic to keep in your mind. So take a deep breath. I hope I'm not talking too fast. Let's go rehash this a little bit. So ferritin is a storage protein for iron. It is meant to store protein in the cell, but it is also found in the blood, albeit it has different characteristics than the ones it does when it's in the cell. So 2, serum ferritin is used as a gauge for total body iron load. This is all based off of that 1972 paper that talks about having low serum ferritin would lead one to believe that they have low iron in the body. If you have high serum ferritin, you are more likely to be in iron overload or hemochromatosis, right? So we've kind of like used low ferritin, serum ferritin, as a gauge for what your total body store is for iron. And then 4, serum ferritin has been glycosylated or marked for some unknown function or purpose. There's something about serum ferritin that is just a little bit different, and we're not sure of the connection between that mark, that glycosylation, and an immune response downstream. So this is what we're not sure of. What is ferritin's real role outside of the cell? Is it a transfer protein like transferrin? Transferrin is the true, right? It's even in its name. Transfer ferrin, transfer iron, right? That's our kind of main mover for iron. Maybe serum ferritin is kind of like trying to help out when it can. How much does it carry? How does it release it into the cell? There are receptors on cells that bind ferritin to allow for it to be taken in. Again, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? How much iron is being absorbed? Don't know. Is there a difference between the storage version of ferritin and the serum version of ferritin? There is, right? We thought about that glycosylation, the iron load, but really, like, we're still not sure. We're still calling it ferritin. And then what does the quality of serum ferritin indicate for the body as a whole? Is it an inflammatory marker? Because we saw that high serum ferritin leads to decreased immune production of those lymphocytes and macrophages. But also, when you think back to the anemia of inflammation, low ferritin can also be an indicator for inflammation as well. So, we're kind of straddling this huge deficit in understanding here, where being low can mean inflammation and being high can mean inflammation. It's confusing. So I just wanted to give a little graphic on glycosylation. So it's essentially just a protein with, like, if you think of like the way you would mark a page in a book that you wanted to come back to, you kind of fold that tab down. Folding that tab down on the page lets you know that you want to come back here. So ferritin has these little carbohydrate marker on it, and it helps the body recognize it as something that needs to be, something needs to be done with this. What that is, we're not sure. And if you're a diabetic, you're not unfamiliar with the function of glycosylation. So for diabetics, one of our big metrics of health is the hemoglobin A1C, right? And that is, a determinant of how our average blood sugars have been. But what the hemoglobin A1C actually measures is the degree of glycosylation of our red blood cells, right? So again, this is kind of like something that we didn't know we knew about, but we actually do. So most serum ferritin is glycosylated, right? And part of determining and understanding what it is that serum ferritin is doing and why has to come down to understanding what the glycosylation, like, why is it being modified, and what is that modification telling the body about it? So glycosylation could be means of tagging proteins for disposal in states of stress or disease, right? And this kind of goes back to maybe it's an inflammatory marker. But that's not necessarily true. There are degrees of glycosylation, different types of glycosylation, markers for it being safe, markers for it being tagged to gotten rid of. There's like a couple different reasons for it having that carbohydrate tag. So the cell is able to modify the type of glycosylation dependent on the state of stress. Again, low-grade stress, not as bad of a mark. As things get worse and it really needs to be taken care of, it's getting really heavily glycosylated. That's eliciting an even greater immune response. And then, like I mentioned before, hemoglobin A1C has to do with how our red blood cells are glycosylated. So kind of deciphering that marker system of the degrees of glycosylation is going to play a huge part in our understanding of what it is serum ferritin is doing for us. How much of the marker, what type, is the immune system recognizing this as means of like, oh shit, we got to get rid of this? Or is it, like a spectrum of, well, it's only a little bit glycosylated, not that bad. Oh my God, there's a lot. I got to get rid of it now. Don't know. What do they mean? And again, just thinking about pages in a notebook and making bookmarks as something that you need to address. So could it be a sign of inflammation? There are papers that talk about it being evidence for inflammation. So in one paper, they were talking about serum ferritin independent of iron load, right? So they're just looking at serum ferritin, not really paying attention to the iron load of the body that the serum ferritin is in, has acted as a pro-inflammatory marker for cytokine production. Fascinating. Fascinating, right? Because, okay, they take serum ferritin, they inject it into a cell culture or a body, and it elicits an inflammatory cascade. So maybe those glycosylations on serum ferritin are actually a sign for inflammation. And then in cancer patients, ferritin decreased the lymphocyte and T cell production in states of cancer. I believe that paper was specifically breast cancer. But again, it's clearly demonstrating an impact on the function of the immune system. Lymphocytes are white blood cells. T cells are kind of like the killer cells that are addressing threats in the body. And all of these inhibit particular types of immune functions. Again, very, very curious about what and why ferritin is doing this and why serum ferritin would be in these states. So it increases, let's break this down for a second. So it technically is increasing inflammation, right? So it's like decreasing the lymphocyte production and the T cell production by decreasing the immune response. And this is particular to the state of cancer that this one paper in particular talked about. Now, it's important to note that there are several different types of immune responses. Two I'm going to focus on are antibody mediated and T cell mediated. So when you think of our body using antibodies, there's a threat in our body. We throw antibodies at it. It binds to that foreign substance, and those antibodies elicit an immune response from us, right? So that means we've already been kind of like infiltrated, right? It's been marked and it's being taken care of. The T cell is more of a direct source. So we have this kind of new, fresh threat. It has not had the ability to dig its claws in yet. The T cell is getting it, addressing it, kind of wrapping it up really quickly and taking care of it so that it doesn't lead to an infection. If there were an infection, that would be more of an antibody reaction. Does that make sense? T cell is kind of a pre-infection. Antibody is a post-infection response. Okay. Now, in relation to this particular cancer study on serum ferritin, they were thinking that, and this is genius on behalf of the body and cancer and their interactions. So the cancerous cell decreased the activation of T cell, right? So when cancer was in the cell, ferritin increased. Now, the increase in ferritin decreased the T cell reactivity. Now, if you're a cancer cell, this is genius, right? Because T cell is what is taking care of the cancer cell, right? Because that's the foreigner that the T cell wants to latch onto and get rid of before it can proliferate. So the cancer cell gets ferritin on its side to kill off that T cell reaction so that it can grow. But what it does, it's basically like self-preservation on the part of the cancer cell, right? And it's using serum ferritin as its middleman to handle that, right? So the cancer is using ferritin to deactivate the cells responsible for killing it. It's brilliant. Doesn't, it's not great for a cancer survivor, but it does shed really, really good light on how serum ferritin can influence an immune reaction. So what does this mean for someone dealing with anemia, right? You go to the doctor's office and you're like, hey, your doctor comes in and says, hey, you're low in serum ferritin. Let's address this. Let's get you on an iron supplement. You need to be thinking to yourself, am I really low in iron, or is there something more behind this? Think about, this should be your first question. Think about how much you are consuming of iron on a daily basis. I'm willing to bet that you would be very surprised at the amount of iron that you're getting. Enriched wheat products, they are all enriched with reduced iron. Leafy greens, nuts, seeds, meats. I mean, it's difficult not to get enough iron. So if you have your doctor coming to you asking you, like, hey, what's the deal with your ferritin? You need to not be worried about taking more iron. You need to be concerned in the factors affecting your absorption of iron, right? Because is iron really the issue? Probably not, because most are getting enough. What are the factors concerning how iron is absorbed? This can be supporting nutrients, things like copper, vitamin A, vitamin E, or inflammatory agents that are creating or promoting inflammation that is causing our body to sequester iron out of circulation, right? Like that that anemia of inflammation. So then at the end of the meeting with your doc, you need to think, how reliable is serum ferritin really as a true determinant of our iron load? If there are instances of too much being a bad thing, too little being a bad thing, and each of those states, each of those conditions pointing to the fact that any amount of serum ferritin may be an indicator of an inflammatory response. Something we have to look deeper at this. So things to consider. These are some more like kind of sit back in your chair, give yourself some time to think about it. But in that 1972 paper that we are using as the basis of our understanding of anemia, the low serum ferritin, low iron, high serum ferritin, high iron, were the subjects in that 1972 paper that set the standard for healthy ferritin levels, were they actually healthy themselves? Or was it that everyone had some degree of low-grade inflammation? I don't know, right? What was the state of nutrient deficiency and mineral imbalance in those populations being tested? There's no way to know. They didn't test. And might serum ferritin be an indicator for low-grade inflammation? There's lots of signs saying that it is. But again, is some degree of inflammation okay? What is the acceptable range? Because if you look at the ranges now, it's insane. It's like, if you're a man, you can be anywhere between 12 nanograms per milliliter up to like 300. Women are like 10 to 200. There's just a huge range in acceptable levels of serum ferritin. And if it's a marker of inflammation, that's not a good thing, right? So do we have a good enough understanding of what else can influence iron absorption before we just start throwing back unbound iron into our system? So again, this is Diabetics for Diabetics Radio. Why would this matter to us? So iron has a profound impact on glucose metabolism. That is what I am all about. That is what I have talked about ad nauseum. I encourage you to check out the last episode, episode 13, talking about the connection between iron overload and diabetes. So iron influences glucose metabolism, inflammation, and the health of organ tissue, like your pancreas, like your liver, like your heart, like your kidneys. So a misdiagnosis of anemia may lead to treatments that are actually making your inflammatory conditions worse. The worse they get, the worse your diabetes gets, right? So we really need to understand this serum ferritin inflammation connection. And I'm proud to say that I have just released my new book, An Ironclad Cause, Solving Diabetes and More. I dive very deep. I talk about the ferritin connection with diabetes and elaborate on how we got to where we are, why I think we are iron overloaded, and how that has impacted the health of our liver, the health of our pancreas, and more organs on top of that, as well as means of addressing it. So that's all I got. I got my references here, a couple links. Again, if you are at all curious about what else I am reading and looking at, please do not hesitate to leave a comment. Again, follow me on TikTok at Bowie_Madison and subscribe to the channel here. There are more episodes coming. Again, this is just the beginning, okay? The cure is somewhere here. The road to healing begins here. All right. I'm so grateful for you being here. Thank you so much for listening. This is Bowie Madison with Diabetics for Diabetics Radio, signing off. Thanks.